In front of 300 guests, my husband pointed at me and shouted, "You've got 5 days to get out. My mistress is moving in." Welcome to her revenge. I have a new story for you today.
At my husband's sister's birthday party in front of 300 guests, he suddenly announced he was throwing me out. 5 days. Get out so my mistress can move in. I stood there in a white apron, still holding a tea tray. His sister laughed on livestream 3 years living here free, and now she's finally useful as a servant. His mistress deliberately spilled water on my shoes. My mother-in-law pointed at me. Kneel and wipe her shoes. But when the most powerful man in the room walked past my husband and came straight to me, a blue envelope was pulled out, and they were stunned into silence. I am so grateful you are here with me today. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell me what country or city are you watching from. I read every single one, and knowing where this story reaches means everything to me. A quick note: this story includes fictional elements for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to actual names or places is coincidental, but the message it carries is worth keeping. The woman in the mirror didn't look like someone who was about to change everything. That was the point. I stood in the master bedroom of a Zorbay villa at 4:45 in the afternoon, tying the strings of a white cotton apron around my waist with the same calm I used to sign acquisition contracts. Slow, deliberate, no wasted movement. The apron was plain, no embroidery, no monogram, nothing that would make anyone look twice, which was exactly why I had chosen it. Downstairs, I could already hear the caterers arranging chairs on the stone terrace, the soft clink of champagne flutes being set out in rows, the low hum of the sound system running its pre-event check. The smell of fresh gardenias drifted up through the open window. Melina had insisted on gardenias, said they photographed beautifully. I had ordered them without argument. Tonight, I needed everything to feel exactly the way they expected it to feel. I looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment. 30 years old. Founder and Chief Executive Officer of the Solitaire Group, a gemstone and luxury holdings company operating across 14 countries. A woman whose signature on a single document could shift the direction of an entire regional market. And tonight, I was going to spend the next few hours carrying a tea tray. I turned toward the window. Azure Bay stretched out below me in the last light of a California evening, the water catching the sunset in long copper ribbons, the cliffs dropping clean to the shore, the private dock sitting quiet at the edge of the property. I had stood at this exact window 3 years ago, the day the escrow closed, holding a pen that had just signed my name to the deed. Alone. No champagne, no celebration, no one to share it with. Just me, this view, and the quiet certainty that I had built something real. 6 weeks later, I had married Alaric Voss. The memory of the first time I met his mother came back the way those memories always do, not gradually, but all at once. Like a door opening onto a room you thought you had locked. It was a Sunday dinner early in the relationship, before the ring, before any of it was official. Melina had looked me over the way a buyer examines a piece of furniture at an estate sale, assessing, calculating, already deciding it wasn't quite right for the space. She had smiled the whole time. That was the part I remembered most. The smile never moved. Alaric could have done better, she had said to her friend in the kitchen, not knowing I was standing in the hallway, or perhaps knowing and not caring. With Melina, the distinction rarely mattered. I had filed it away. I had been filing things away for 3 years. The second memory arrived quieter. A Tuesday night, maybe 8 months into the marriage. Alaric on a phone call in his office downstairs, door not quite closed. I had passed by on my way to the kitchen and caught 3 words that stopped me in the hallway. The Solitaire Group. I had pressed myself against the wall and listened. His voice had a quality I hadn't heard before, an eagerness that sat just below the professional surface, barely contained. He was talking to someone about contracts, about access, about what it would mean to get a foot in that door. His voice had the particular hunger of a man who believed a single phone call could change his life. I had stood in that hallway for a long time after the call ended. I crossed the room to the antique dresser and pulled open the top drawer. Nestled beneath a folded silk scarf was a navy blue envelope, thick paper, the bank's embossed seal on the upper left corner, my full legal name printed in clean type on the front. I held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it. Then I tucked it into the front pocket of the apron. 3 soft knocks at the bedroom door. "Come in, Marco." The door opened, and Marco Reeves, my chief of operations for the past 11 years, currently presenting himself to the household as a hired caterer, stepped inside. He was 60, lean, unhurried, with the kind of face that told you nothing unless he wanted it to. He had worked for me longer than most of my senior staff. He knew when to speak, and more importantly, when not to. "Ms. Serafina." His voice was low, professionally even. "Everything is in place. The security team checked in at 4. Mr. Xavier's car was spotted at the bottom of the hill 20 minutes ago. Tell him to wait until I give the signal," I said. "Not a second before." "Understood." He paused. "And the audio system, live the moment the first guest sits down." Marco nodded. He started to turn, then stopped. His eyes moved to the apron just briefly, the way a person glances at something that bothers them without wanting to show it. "You know you don't have to wear that." I looked down at the plain white cotton, then back at the mirror. "Yes, I do," I said. "I need them to feel completely certain before I take it off." He held my gaze for a beat longer than usual. Then he nodded once, the way he nodded when he understood something that didn't need further discussion, and pulled the door closed behind him. I stood alone in the room. 3 years. 3 years of watching, waiting, learning exactly who these people were when they believed no one important was paying attention. 3 years of Sunday dinners where I was talked over. Business calls where my opinions were redirected. Small humiliations served with the confidence of people who had decided very early on that I was not worth the full weight of their attention. They had been so certain. That certainty was the only thing I had ever needed from them. I placed my hand flat against the front pocket of the apron, feeling the edge of the envelope beneath the fabric. From the gardens below, a burst of laughter rose through the warm evening air, bright, performative, the specific pitch of someone who wanted to be heard rather than amused. Cassandra's laugh, which meant the guests were arriving, which meant it was time. The party had been in full swing for exactly 4 minutes before I realized Cassandra had turned her own birthday into a production. I came down the back staircase at 5 o'clock with a silver tea tray balanced in both hands. Stepping into the warm evening air of the garden terrace just as the last of the golden hour light settled over Azure Bay. The transformation was impressive, I had to admit. String lights threaded through every olive tree, long linen-covered tables, arranged in a crescent facing the water, a jazz quartet playing something understated near the pool house. Gardenias everywhere, exactly as requested. 300 guests moving through it all in their summer finest champagne already in hand. It looked like a dream. It was designed to. I had approved every detail of this party myself, the guest list, the catering contract, the fairy lights Melina had specified down to the watt. I had approved it because a controlled environment with witnesses present was the only setting in which the final phase of a 3-year evaluation could be brought to a conclusive close. I moved along the outer edge of the terrace tray-level pace, unhurried the way someone moves, when they have learned that being invisible in a room is sometimes the most powerful position available. Marco was already stationed at the outdoor kitchen near the far wall, methodically arranging serving platters with the focused calm of a man who had done this exact work many times before, though not in any previous case, as a hired caterer. He didn't look up as I passed. He didn't need to. Everything between us had already been said 4 floors above, in a room that still smelled like gardenias and a decision made 3 years in the making. At the center of the garden, beneath the largest string light canopy, Cassandra had claimed her stage. She was 22 today, Alaric's younger sister, And she had the particular energy of someone who had confused attention for affection so long ago that she could no longer tell them apart. She stood in front of a tripod-mounted phone in a white dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent, one hand holding a champagne flute she hadn't touched, the other gesturing expansively at the view behind her. "Welcome back, everyone." Her voice carried across the terrace, pitched perfectly for an audience that was partly present and partly watching from a screen somewhere. 22 years old, and I am literally standing at our family's beachfront estate at Azure Bay. Can you see this view? Can you actually see it? From 20 feet away, I watched a young woman near the garden entrance quietly raise her own camera. Not a phone, but a compact professional setup. The kind a person carries when they're serious about what they do. She was perhaps 27, dark-haired, dressed simply in a way that read as intentional rather than understated. She was filming Cassandra with the careful attention of someone collecting material rather than celebrating a birthday. I didn't know her name yet, but I recognized the type immediately. She was a content creator, and she was paying close attention. I set the tray down on a side table near the rose garden and began arranging the cups. "That's my sister-in-law," Cassandra announced to her live stream, her voice brightening in the particular way it did when she found a prop she hadn't planned for. She had spotted me. Of course she had. She's been living here for free for 3 years, and the very best contribution she can make to my birthday party is wait for it serving tea. Isn't that just precious? Laughter from a cluster of guests nearby. Not everyone laughed, but enough did. I did not stop arranging the cups. I did not look up. I did not give her the flinch she was waiting for, because I had learned somewhere in the long middle of this marriage that the flinch was the only thing she actually wanted. Without it, the moment had no power. It was just a woman talking at a phone. The young woman with the camera lowered it slightly. She glanced at me, then back at Cassandra, then tapped something quickly into her phone with her thumb, frowning at the screen for just a second before she raised the camera again. Near the outdoor kitchen, a guest in a linen blazer leaned toward Marco. "Is that the owner's wife?" the man asked, nodding in my direction. Marco continued arranging a row of dessert plates unhurried. "That depends on what you mean by owner," he said. The man in the blazer looked at him with the mildly puzzled expression of someone who had expected a simpler answer. Marco offered him a small, pleasant smile and said nothing further. The man eventually moved on. Back at center stage, Cassandra had escalated. She reached behind her and lifted a handbag from the table, dark chocolate leather gold hardware, unmistakably, or seemingly unmistakably, a Hermes Birkin. She held it up to the camera the way an auctioneer presents a lot to the room. "And this Love's limited edition. Only 30 made in the entire world. My brother has taste, even when his wife doesn't." More laughter. Someone near the pool actually applauded. I picked up the tea tray and began moving toward the main tables. Behind me, I heard the young woman with the camera go quiet. Not the polite quiet of someone being discreet. The very specific quiet of someone who has just noticed something wrong. I didn't turn around, but I heard the soft, rapid tapping of her searching something on her phone, the way a person searches when they already suspect the answer and are simply confirming it. Then a pause. Then nothing. When I reached the first table and set down the tray, I let my eyes move just briefly, just enough toward her. She was staring at the bag. Then she looked at me. Then she looked past me, toward the front gate of the estate, as though she was calculating the distance between where she was standing and something she expected to arrive. I turned back to the table and finished setting out the cups. Whatever she had found on that phone, she was keeping it to herself. For now. There are words you hear so many times they stop feeling like insults and start feeling like wallpaper. I had been collecting Melina's words for 3 years. By now, I had enough to paper every room in this house. The party had moved into its second hour, and the garden was exactly what Melina had wanted it to be, a stage. She had positioned herself at the center table with the instinct of a woman who had spent decades making sure she was always the most important person in any room she entered. 4 of her friends surrounded her, all of them dressed in the careful, expensive way of people who wanted you to know they had money without appearing to try. Helen Marsh sat to Melina's left, a quieter presence more contained, the kind of woman who watched before she spoke. I knew Helen's name because Alaric had mentioned her husband once in passing. Gerald Marsh owned a mid-sized manufacturing firm, had done business in the luxury sector for years. I had filed the name away the same way I filed everything away. Melina had been conducting a tour. I caught the tail end of it as I came around the far side of the garden with a fresh pitcher of water, Melina gesturing broadly at the property around her, her voice carrying the particular pride of someone displaying something they believe belongs to them. "Helen, all of this is Alaric's," she was saying. "He manages the entire property. The view, the pool, the dock, all of it. My son has done very well for himself." Helen turned her water glass slowly on the tablecloth. "Managing and owning are two very different things, Melina." "Same difference?" Melina said, waving a hand. Helen's eyes moved across the garden, then a slow, quiet sweep of the kind that doesn't look like searching, but is. They found me standing at the edge of the terrace with the pitcher in my hands. Something shifted in her expression. Not surprise exactly. More like recognition arriving a beat later than expected. She set her hand flat on the table and said nothing. I moved toward the table. That was when Lyra arrived. She came from the direction of the pool house, Alaric's girlfriend, though no one in this household had ever used that word out loud in front of me, as though naming the thing would make it require acknowledgement. She was perhaps 28, wearing a dress that left no room for ambiguity, one hand resting against her stomach with the practiced tenderness of someone who had learned that gesture produced results. She had been presenting herself as pregnant for the past 3 months. Whether she was or wasn't, I had my own information about that. But tonight was not the moment. "Ah, Alaric, baby, look at this view," she said, settling close beside him at the edge of the group. "Our son is going to grow up in paradise." Alaric looked at her with an expression I recognized, not because I had seen it directed at her, but because I had spent 2 years not seeing it directed at me. Soft. Open. The expression of a man who believed what was standing in front of him. I reached the table and began filling the first glass. What happened next took less than 3 seconds. Lyra shifted her weight, angling herself slightly toward the table, a small movement, casual looking. The kind that reads as accidental, unless you have spent years learning how calculated small movements can be. The heel of her shoe caught the edge of my path just as I reached across to set the pitcher down. The pitcher tilted. Water moved. 3 drops landed on Lyra's shoe. Oh my God. Her voice hit a register that cut through the jazz quartet cleanly. "These are Louboutins." The table went quiet first, then the tables around it. The quiet spread outward like something dropped in still water. Melina was on her feet before I had straightened up. "Serafina." The name came out like a verdict. "Look what you've done. Do you have any idea what those shoes cost? That is more than your entire month's salary, you clumsy, ungrateful." She stopped herself, then didn't. "Kneel down and wipe them off. Right now. In front of everyone." The jazz quartet played on indifferent. I set the pitcher on the table. I turned and looked at Melina directly, not with heat, not with the watery eyes of someone trying to hold themselves together, but with the level attention of someone who is simply done pretending a thing is not happening. "I won't," I said. Melina's eyes widened. Around us, 300 guests had found something more interesting than their champagne. "I beg your pardon." I said I won't kneel. I kept my voice exactly where it was, flat, clear, unhurried. Not today, not ever again. It was not the voice of someone frightened. It was the voice of someone who had finally reached the bottom of a very long countdown and found to no one's surprise but everyone's discomfort that there was nothing left beneath it. Helen looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked down at her own hands on the table. Across the garden, I could see Diana, whose name I had learned from a guest introduction 20 minutes earlier, with her camera lowered, watching. Not recording. Watching. Melina drew herself up to her full height, pointed one finger directly at my face, and said loudly, clearly, for anyone within 30 feet who might have missed it, "You have no idea who you are talking to in this house." The sentence landed the way she intended it to, like a door closing. I let it land. Then I said quietly and without moving, "Actually, I know exactly whose house this is, and so will everyone else." I paused just long enough. Soon. It was not a threat. It was not a promise. It was simply a fact stated a little ahead of schedule in the way that facts sometimes need to be stated when the room requires something to hold on to. Melina stared at me. Helen stared at the table. Somewhere near the pool house, Lyra had stopped rubbing her shoe and gone very still. Lyra understood something most people in that garden did not, that the most effective performances are the ones that look like they aren't performances at all. The silence that followed my words had barely settled before she moved. Not quickly, not obviously, but with the unhurried precision of someone who had been waiting for exactly this kind of opening. She pressed one hand against her stomach, let her shoulders drop just slightly, and turned toward Alaric with the expression of a woman who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has finally found someone willing to help her set it down. "Alaric." Her voice came out soft, a little unsteady. "I'm not feeling well. The stress, it isn't good for the baby. Can you please just handle this?" I watched him respond to her the way a compass responds to north. Immediate, unconsidered. He crossed the garden toward us with the air of a man who had already decided the shape of the situation before he arrived in it, which I had learned was how Alaric approached most things. He stopped a few feet from me and looked at me with the flat, deliberate coldness he reserved for moments when he wanted an audience to understand that he was in charge. "You made a scene at my sister's birthday party." "Your sister made the scene," I said. "I declined to perform in it." "That's the problem with you, Serafina. You always think you're above everything." "No," I said. "I think I'm above being told to kneel on my own property." The word property landed differently than I intended, or perhaps exactly as I intended, depending on which version of the evening you were watching. Alaric's jaw tightened. From somewhere behind us, Cassandra had redirected her phone toward our corner of the garden. She had the instinct of someone who had spent years learning where the energy in a room was moving, and right now, it was moving here. "Oh, this is content, you guys," she told, her live stream voice bright, with the specific delight of someone watching a situation deteriorate that does not involve them. "This is actual, unscripted content." Diana was still recording. She was not smiling. Alaric reached into the inside breast pocket of his jacket. I had known about the envelope since that morning, not because anyone told me, but because I had spent 3 years learning to read Alaric Voss the way you learn to read weather, not by waiting for the storm, but by watching the way the light changes in the hour before it arrives. The slight distance he had kept from me all day. The way he had checked his jacket pocket twice during the pre-party setup when he thought no one was looking. The fact that he had dressed more carefully than a birthday party for his 22-year-old sister required. He had been carrying that envelope since he left the house this morning. He pulled it out and threw it. Not handed. Threw. The white envelope left his fingers with enough force to carry a point, spinning once through the warm evening air before it hit the stone terrace and skidded to a stop at my feet. 300 people watched it land. "Consider that my birthday gift to Cassandra," Alaric said. His voice was controlled, projected the voice of a man making a speech he had rehearsed. "It's a notice of property reclamation. You have 5 days to collect your things and vacate this house. I want you gone before Lyra moves in. I will not have my son come into this world in a home that still has a failure like you in it." The jazz quartet finished a phrase and paused between songs. In that pause, the silence was absolute. Lyra's mouth curved barely just at the corners, the small satisfied expression of someone watching a wager pay out. Melina stood with her arms crossed, her chin lifted, wearing the look of a woman who believes she has just witnessed the correct order of things being restored. Cassandra breathed into her phone. Are you guys seeing this? Tell me you're seeing this. I looked down at the envelope on the ground. It was a standard white business envelope, no legal seal, no court stamp, no official header visible from where I stood. A private document, drafted to look authoritative to someone who might not know the difference. I knew the difference. I raised my eyes not to Alaric, not to Lyra, not to the 300 people who had gone very still around us. I looked out past the edge of the garden to where Azure Bay stretched dark and wide beneath the last thin line of light on the horizon. The water didn't care about any of this. It had been here long before this house, before this marriage, before any of the agreements and assumptions and carefully constructed fictions that had accumulated over 3 years in these rooms. I had bought this view. I had bought every inch of ground between here and that water, alone in an escrow office on a Tuesday morning, with a pen that had my name on the signature line and no one else's. I thought about that for exactly 1 moment. Then I smiled. Behind me, near the outdoor kitchen where the sound of the party had never quite reached, Marco spoke quietly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I was the only one close enough, and that was entirely by design. Soup's ready, Ms. Serafina. He said, his attention apparently still on the serving station in front of him. Everything is right on time. I heard him. I bent down slowly without urgency, the way you move when you are not afraid of what happens next, and reached not for the white envelope at my feet but for something else entirely. Something that had been sitting in the front pocket of a white cotton apron since 4:45 this afternoon. Alaric gave me 5 days. I gave him 10 seconds. I straightened up from my crouch with the navy blue envelope in my right hand, and I took 1 breath, not because I needed to steady myself, but because the next 60 seconds had been planned since 6 o'clock that morning, and I wanted to move through them at exactly the right pace. Too fast, and it would look like anger. Too slow, and it would lose the room. I needed it to feel like what it was inevitable. Since we're exchanging paperwork tonight, I said, holding the envelope out where the nearest guests could see it clearly, I have something to contribute as well. I broke the seal and removed the document inside. 3 pages, the bank's letterhead printed cleanly at the top, a notary stamp in the lower right corner alongside a direct line for the institution's legal department. This is a revocation of temporary property management authorization. I said, pitching my voice to Carrie, without raising it, a skill that took years to develop and cost nothing once you had it. It was executed at 6 o'clock this morning by the legal owner of Azure Bay Villa. Effective as of that timestamp, all management rights previously delegated to Alaric Voss over this property are formally terminated. I want to be clear about something because the word management matters here. Alaric had never owned this house. He had been given temporary authority to oversee its operations, pay the utility accounts, coordinate maintenance, sign off on vendor contracts, while I maintained full legal title. It was an arrangement I had put in place deliberately as part of an evaluation I had been conducting for the better part of 2 years. The deed had always carried my name. The mortgage had always been drawn against my assets. The only thing that had ever been his was the appearance of control, and I had just revoked that. What are you talking about? Alaric's voice came out tighter than he intended. The deed, Alaric, the one with my name on the ownership line. The one that has had my name on it since the Tuesday morning I signed it alone in an escrow office 3 years ago. He stared at me. I watched the machinery of his thinking work through the implications slowly, like someone trying to read a document in a language they almost know. Melina moved first. She crossed the distance between us in 3 steps and pulled the document from my hand with the abruptness of someone who believed that removing a piece of paper from a room could remove the information it contained. She was holding a copy. The original had been filed with the county recorder's office at 9 that morning, time-stamped, indexed, and entirely beyond anyone's reach. This is fabricated, she said. Her voice had the force of a person who had spent decades making declarations and having them accepted. This is something she manufactured. Alaric, call your attorney right now. The bank's legal department number is printed in the lower right corner, I said without inflection. Please call them. I'll be right here. Melina looked down at the page. The hand holding it developed a slight tremor. She didn't call anyone. Helen rose from her chair slowly, the way a person stands when they have decided something and are simply following through on the decision. She looked at Melina with the measured expression of someone who is about to say something they have been sitting on for the past hour. Melina. Her voice was quiet and perfectly clear. Managing and owning. I said that to you earlier this evening, do you remember? You told me it was the same thing. Melina said nothing. Alaric stepped toward me, dropping his voice in the way men do when they want a conversation to feel private while still performing it for a room. You arranged this. You planned all of it. I protected what belongs to me, I said. There's a distinction. I have been running this property for 3 years. You have been living on this property for 3 years, I said. Under my permission, which I revoked at 6 this morning, giving proper legal notice to the bank that holds the account records. The revocation is filed time-stamped and entirely in order. Cassandra had stopped narrating her live stream. She was still recording, the phone was still up, still aimed at us, but she had gone quiet in the way people go quiet when they realize they are no longer directing the story. Diana had moved several feet to the left, putting clean distance between herself and the main group, her camera steady. She leaned slightly toward her microphone. Okay, she said low and with the careful precision of someone choosing each word before it left her mouth. I need everyone watching right now to understand that I am standing at what was supposed to be a birthday party. And this woman just produced a legal revocation document from the pocket of a kitchen apron. I am not editorializing. I am describing what I am seeing with my own eyes. Lyra tried once more. She put a hand on Alaric's arm and looked up at him with the soft, practiced worry of someone who had learned that vulnerability correctly deployed could redirect almost anything. Baby, don't let her get to you. She's bluffing. She has to be. The revocation was filed this morning, I said, still not looking at her. There is a timestamp on the document in Mrs. Voss's hands, if she would like to read it. A bluff does not have a county filing number. Alaric looked at me, not the way he had looked at me across 3 years of dinner tables and shared hallways and morning kitchens, where I had been furniture. He moved around without noticing. This was different. This was the look of a man standing on ground he had believed was solid, feeling for the first time the particular hollow sensation of realizing it never was. I held his gaze and said nothing. Because this right here, this exact moment, was not the ending. It was the opening. From the stone pathway that ran along the garden's eastern edge, connecting the main entrance gate to the terrace, came a sound that cut cleanly through everything else in the garden. Footsteps, unhurried, evenly spaced. The sound of someone who had never in his life felt the need to announce himself because the room had always rearranged itself by the time he arrived. I did not turn around. I already knew who it was. Alaric had spent 3 years trying to get Xavier Hartwell into a room. Xavier Hartwell had just walked into his. I heard the footsteps reach the edge of the terrace, that same measured pace, neither rushed nor performed, and then I heard them stop. I still hadn't turned around. I was watching Alaric's face instead, which was considerably more informative. I saw the exact moment he registered the new presence at the garden's entrance. Because the expression he had been wearing, the particular tightness of a man who had just been publicly outmaneuvered and was still deciding how to respond, shifted into something else entirely. Something that looked briefly like relief. He thought Xavier Hartwell was here for him. That was the last mistake he made that evening, though he wouldn't understand it as such for another few minutes. I turned. Xavier crossed the garden at the same unhurried pace his footsteps had announced. He was perhaps 50, built with the economy of a man who had never needed to take up space to command it, dressed in a charcoal suit that was expensive in the way that doesn't announce itself. No tie, no guest gift, no assistant trailing behind him. He had the self-contained quality of someone who had attended enough events to know that the ones worth attending never required much in the way of entrance. His eyes moved once across the garden, a quick professional sweep that took in the crowd, the overturned social order, the white envelope still lying on the stone terrace where Alaric had thrown it. And then they found me. He walked directly to where I was standing. Not to Alaric. Not to Melina, who had already begun composing her expression into something appropriate for greeting important guests. Directly to me. "I apologize for arriving late," he said. His voice was low, even the kind of voice that didn't need volume to carry weight. The coast road was backed up past the headland. "You're exactly on time," I said, and I meant it in every sense that mattered. Alaric was beside us in 4 steps, hand extended. The reflexive confidence of a man who had rehearsed this introduction so many times, it had become muscle memory. "Gee, Xavier, what a surprise. I had no idea you were coming tonight." He pumped the handshake with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting 3 years to use it. "I've been trying to reach your office, my assistant has called. I've sent 3 proposals through the formal channel." "Yes," Xavier said. "I know." He released the handshake. Clean. Final. The social equivalent of a door closing. Alaric did not register it. He had too much momentum. "Well, perfect timing, honestly. There was a small family matter, nothing serious, already handled. But listen, while I have you here, the regional supply contract. I've been putting together a proposal for 18 months, and I think if you could just give me 20 minutes. Alaric." Xavier said the name without sharpness, without warmth, with exactly the level of attention you give something that is present but not relevant. "I didn't come tonight to discuss a contract." The sentence landed in the space between them. "Then why did you come?" Xavier looked at me for a half-second, then back at Alaric. "I was invited," he said. Melina arrived at Xavier's elbow with the speed of a woman who had spent decades understanding that proximity to important men was its own form of currency. "Ah, Xavier, what an honor." Her voice had shifted registers entirely, the sharp edge she kept for daughters-in-law filed away, replaced by the warmed-over graciousness she reserved for people she wanted something from. "I'm Melina Voss, Alaric's mother. We've heard so much about you. This is a real pleasure, Mrs. Voss." Xavier acknowledged her with a single nod, the minimum required by courtesy, and then turned back toward me as though the conversation had never been interrupted. "I understand there was some paperwork exchanged." "There was," I said, "and the situation is as we discussed." "Exactly as we discussed." He nodded, once satisfied. The way a person nods when they have received confirmation of something they already knew. Across the garden, I could see Diana. She had gone very still, the particular stillness of a person who has just placed a face and is in the process of understanding what that placement means. Her camera was still running, but she had lowered it slightly, holding it at chest height, rather than eye level, as though the situation had outgrown the frame she had been using for it. She leaned toward her microphone, speaking low. "Okay," she said, and there was something different in her voice now. Not the bright commentary of a content creator narrating drama, but the quieter register of someone genuinely trying to communicate something they find significant. "For everyone watching, the man who just walked in is Xavier Hartwell. He chairs the Regional Trade Alliance, which oversees commercial partnerships and supply contracts across 6 coastal counties. He is, to put it plainly, someone that every major business in this region wants in their corner." And he just walked past Alaric Voss to say hello to the woman carrying the tea tray. She paused. "I don't have a caption for that yet." Near the outdoor kitchen, a man in a weekend blazer who had been standing beside Marco for the past several minutes turned to him with the low, careful tone of someone who didn't want to ask loudly. "Is that the woman he just greeted? Is she the owner here?" Marco set a serving platter into position without breaking rhythm. That, he said, depends on what you mean by owner, though I'll say this much: she signed for the property. Alaric signed a different kind of document. The man in the blazer looked as though he wanted a cleaner answer. Marco did not provide one. Alaric was watching me now. Not with the authority he had carried into the garden 10 minutes ago, not with the calculated coldness he had used when he threw the envelope. He was watching me the way a person watches something they believed they understood after the moment they realized they never did. The thought forming behind his eyes was getting closer to the surface. I could see it working its way up through the sequence of the evening: Xavier walking to me first. Xavier knowing about the paperwork, Xavier saying he had been invited, assembling itself into a question that Alaric had never thought to ask in 3 years of living in the same house. Xavier stepped slightly closer to me, dropping his voice to a register that carried perhaps 3 feet and no further. "Should I start with the bag?" he said. "Or the credentials?" I considered the garden for a moment. Cassandra was still live streaming, still positioned under the string lights with her phone on the tripod, still performing for the audience that had watched her build the last 2 hours of her evening into something she believed was glamorous and permanent. "The bag first," I said. "Let her finish the broadcast." Xavier nodded. Neither of us had spoken loudly enough for Alaric to catch the words. But he had seen the exchange, the ease of it, the shorthand of 2 people who had spoken this way before, and I watched the last of his certainty quietly leave his face. Cassandra had spent the better part of 2 hours building something. Xavier Hartwell took it apart in under 90 seconds. He moved toward her with the same unhurried quality that had characterized everything he did that evening. No announcement, no shift in posture to signal what was coming. Just a man crossing a garden with a purpose that looked from the outside like nothing more than polite interest. Cassandra saw him coming and did what Cassandra always did when someone with obvious importance moved in her direction. She brightened. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Xavier said, stopping beside her tripod setup with the easy courtesy of someone who is about to do something that is not in fact sorry at all. "But I couldn't help noticing the bag." Cassandra's expression opened like a door. "Right." She lifted the Birkin from the table behind her, holding it at the angle she had practiced, the one that caught the light on the hardware. "Limited edition, only 30 made in the entire world. My brother has taste, I'll give him that." "May I take a look?" She handed it to him without hesitation. In her version of events, Xavier Hartwell was about to confirm what she had been telling her audience all evening. The bag was real. The life was real. The image she had been constructing since she set up the tripod at 4:30 that afternoon was real. And here was a man whose opinion carried weight, coming to stand beside her and verify it. Xavier turned the bag over in his hands. He was unhurried about it, checking the stitching along the base, running a thumb across the hardware, and then tilting the bottom toward the nearest string of lights to examine what was stamped there. He looked at it for perhaps 4 seconds. Then he turned the base toward Cassandra's livestream camera and held it steady. "I want to be precise about this," he said, addressing the lens directly in the tone of someone giving testimony rather than commentary, because precision matters here. A genuine Hermes bag carries what's called a blind stamp, a small mark that identifies the craftsperson, the workshop, and the production year, using a letter code that Hermes updates annually. The stamp on this bag does not correspond to any Hermes workshop code in the last 15 years. He paused. What it does correspond to is a phone number. Specifically, the number for a second-hand goods resale shop on the east side of the city. My authentication team flagged this exact bag 3 months ago when it appeared at a consignment event, before it apparently changed hands. The livestream comments moved faster than I could read them. Cassandra stood very still. "You're wrong." Her voice had lost its performance quality. What was underneath it was younger and less certain. "Alaric bought this for me. He said it was—" "Alaric paid for something," Xavier said, setting the bag on the table with the careful neutrality of someone returning borrowed property. "What he paid for and what he was sold are 2 different matters." Cassandra looked at the comment feed on her phone. The screen was moving so quickly it had become illegible. She looked back at the bag. She looked at Xavier. She looked at the camera that had been broadcasting this exchange to however many thousands of people were watching. Diana had not moved from her position across the garden, but she was no longer filming from a distance. She had stepped forward, her camera raised, and she was speaking into her microphone with the careful enunciation of someone who understands that what she says in the next 30 seconds will be replayed. "I have to be transparent with my audience right now," she said. "I reviewed this exact bag style 14 months ago for a segment on authentication. I flagged it at that time as a grade 3 replica, which for anyone unfamiliar means it's a counterfeit produced with moderate quality materials, specifically designed to pass casual inspection, but not professional scrutiny. I didn't say anything earlier tonight because I was working from visual observation at a distance, and I wanted to be certain before I spoke." She paused. "I'm certain now. Turn it off." Cassandra's voice cracked on the second word. She wheeled toward Alaric, who had gone very still at the edge of the group. "Make them stop, just turn off the stream." "The live stream is yours, Cassandra," I said. My voice came out quieter than I expected, which was sometimes how the sentences that land hardest arrive. I can't shut down something that doesn't belong to me. I let a beat pass. "You wanted the world to see your life," I added. "Let them see all of it." Melina moved then. She crossed toward Diana with the momentum of a woman accustomed to removing obstacles, her hand reaching for the camera. Diana sidestepped without drama, putting her body between Melina and the equipment, with the calm efficiency of someone who had been in enough difficult situations to know that the worst thing you can do is escalate. "Ma'am," she said, "that is my personal property and my professional equipment. Please do not touch it." Melina stopped. Not because Diana's words had reached her, I suspected, but because the camera was still running and she was standing directly in front of it. Cassandra sat down. Not a graceful sitting, the kind that happens when the legs make a decision before the rest of the body agrees to it. She was holding the bag in her lap now, both hands wrapped around the handles, staring at it the way you stare at something when you are trying to reconcile the object in front of you with the version of it that had existed in your mind until 30 seconds ago. She had introduced this bag to her audience at the beginning of the evening. She had used it as evidence of a life, of a family, of a position in the world that came with certain guarantees. And now it was sitting in her lap in front of however many thousands of witnesses reclassified. Alaric looked at his sister, then at the bag, then at me. For the first time since he had thrown his envelope onto the terrace, he had nothing ready. No prepared line, no performance. Just a man standing at the edge of an evening that had stopped going the way he had planned it. Xavier turned to me. He had the contained, professional expression of someone who has completed a task and is ready for the next item on a list. "Now," he said, "the other matter." "Now," I said. Lyra had picked the right target. Rich enough to be worth the effort. Ambitious enough to want things he couldn't openly ask for. Distracted enough by what he thought he was getting that he stopped asking the questions a more careful man would have asked in the first week. What she hadn't accounted for was the wife. Specifically, she hadn't accounted for what kind of wife I was. Xavier set a tablet on the nearest table, the same clean, unhurried movement he used for everything, and turned it so the screen faced the small circle of people who had gathered around us in the aftermath of the last 10 minutes. 300 guests had pulled back to a respectful radius, the way a crowd instinctively creates space around something it senses is not finished. "There is a second matter," he said. "It concerns Miss Lyra Denning." I watched the hand leave her stomach. It was a small movement, involuntary, the kind a body makes when the performance it has been running suddenly costs too much to maintain. For 3 months she had kept that hand there through dinners, through conversations, through the studied vulnerability of a woman using the idea of a child as both shield and leverage. In task 3 of the evening, I had watched her deploy it against Melina's guests with the ease of long practice. Now the hand dropped to her side. My team conducted a background investigation over the past 3 weeks. Xavier continued, at the request of a business partner. What that investigation produced is relevant to several people in this garden tonight. He tapped the tablet. The woman you know as Lyra Denning is not her legal name. Her documented name is Laura Desmond. She is currently the subject of 2 active fraud investigations in separate counties, one involving misrepresentation of assets in a private lending arrangement, and one involving falsified financial documentation submitted to a real estate firm. That's not. Lyra took one step back, then stopped as though she had calculated the distance to the nearest exit and found it insufficient. These are matters of public court record, Xavier said with the precision of someone who understood exactly where the line between protected disclosure and defamation ran, and had chosen to stand on the correct side of it. Anyone may request access to active case filings through the county clerk's office. I am not making accusations. I am describing what the public record contains. Alaric had gone the particular shade of still that people go when their body is processing something faster than their mind is willing to accept. Additionally, Xavier said, the medical documentation provided to Mr. Voss 3 months ago as evidence of pregnancy was reviewed by a licensed physician at my request. To be precise, the physician reviewed the documents themselves, not Ms. Denning directly, as that would require her consent. To be precise, the physician reviewed the documents themselves, not Ms. Denning directly, as that would require her consent. Reviewing the formatting registration numbers and facility codes of a document someone has voluntarily submitted as evidence is not a medical examination. It is document analysis. No protected health information was accessed. What the review found was that the documents are inconsistent with the formatting terminology and facility registration numbers used by any licensed medical provider currently operating in this state. They do not correspond to any verifiable source. The sentence landed in the silence the way a stone lands in still water, without drama, without flourish. Just the simple physics of something solid meeting something that had been undisturbed too long. He's lying. Lyra's voice came out with less force than she intended. Alaric? He is lying. He was paid to say this. Lyra. I said her name quietly. Not the name on her legal documents, the name she had introduced herself with, the name she had been using in this house, the name she had built the last 3 months around. Or Laura, whichever you prefer this evening. I paused. I'm going to give you one opportunity to leave this party without any further public discussion. Quietly through the front gate before the next part of the evening begins. Alaric's head turned toward me. What next part? His voice had the flat, stripped quality of a man who has run out of register. The part where your guests hear the phone call, I said. Lyra's face did something I had not seen it do before. The performance dropped, not slowly, not in stages, but all at once, the way a signal drops when you move out of range. What was underneath it was not the softness she had been projecting for 3 months. It was calculation running fast, assessing exits. She knew which phone call I meant. She had known since the moment I said it. Melina stepped forward, her voice finding its familiar authority. Alaric, do not listen to this. She is orchestrating a scene to humiliate this family in front of guests. With respect, Mrs. Voss, Xavier said in the measured tone he used when he wanted to close a line of conversation without appearing to close it. The humiliation present in this garden tonight was not brought here by anyone on my side of it. We are providing illumination. The material was already here. Helen had not moved from her chair across the terrace. She sat with her hands folded, her glass set down, watching Melina with the expression of someone who has arrived at a conclusion they had been resisting for most of the evening. She did not speak. She did not need to. The quality of her stillness said everything that courtesy was preventing her from saying aloud. Lyra looked at the garden around her. The width of it, the guests arranged at their careful distance, the cameras, the lights. The 300 people who had paid various prices to be here this evening and were now receiving something considerably more valuable than a birthday party. She looked at Alaric. He was not looking back. That, I thought, was probably the most honest thing that had happened between them all evening. I became aware, in the periphery of my attention, of a slight vibration near the sound equipment station at the far edge of the terrace, a technician I had contracted 6 weeks ago through a private events firm, who had arrived at 3 that afternoon to install and calibrate the garden's audio system. He had done his work without drawing attention, which was precisely what I had hired him to do. Lyra's phone in the small clutch bag over her shoulder began to buzz. Once. Then again. Then a third time, insistent. The technician near the soundboard caught my eye across the distance of the terrace and gave a single small nod confirmation that the system was live, that the Bluetooth pairing he had established with the venue's audio network was active, and that the next incoming call to the device in Lyra's bag would not stay private. I had arranged this 6 weeks ago. I had been patient for considerably longer than that. Some secrets live in phones, and some parties have very good sound systems. The fourth call arrived 11 seconds after the third one stopped. I know the number because I counted not anxiously, not with the tight chest of someone waiting for something they cannot control, but with the steady attention of a person watching a sequence they designed play out exactly as intended. 11 seconds of the garden holding its breath. 11 seconds of Lyra standing with her clutch bag over her shoulder, and her eyes moving between exits she had already calculated were too far away. Then the fourth call came, and this time the audio did not stay in her bag. It came from every corner of the garden simultaneously, the 12 speakers positioned along the terrace perimeter inside the pool house overhang, and at each end of the long dining tables with the full, warm, professionally calibrated sound quality of a system designed to carry music across 300 square feet of open coastal air. The voice that filled that space was male young and carrying the particular irritability of someone who had been waiting longer than he thought was acceptable. "Lyra, why aren't you picking up? Did you get the money from that guy yet? I'm out of cash. I need it tonight." The garden stopped, not gradually, all at once, the way a film freezes on a single frame. "Eos, you said this would be easy. Rich husband doesn't ask questions desperate for something to hold on to. How long does this actually take?" Lyra's hand found her phone in under 2 seconds. Her fingers moved fast, practiced fast. The speed of someone who manages several versions of herself simultaneously and has learned to move between them quickly. She had no way of knowing the device had been paired to the garden's audio system since 3 o'clock that afternoon. 6 weeks after a technician she had never met completed a job she had never been told about. She cut the call. 10 seconds too late. She cut the call. 10 seconds of audio. Perhaps 11. It was enough. 300 people had heard a stranger's voice fill the garden they had come to for a birthday party. And in 10 seconds, that voice had described with the blunt efficiency of someone who saw no reason to be careful exactly what the last 3 months had been. No one spoke. The jazz quartet had finished their last set 20 minutes earlier, and no one had thought to restart the playlist. The only sound left was the water Azure Bay moving against the cliffs below the property, in its indifferent, unhurried rhythm, entirely unimpressed by what had just occurred above it. Diana had lowered her camera, not to her hip, not to a ready position, all the way down to her side, hanging loose from one hand, the lens pointing at the stone terrace. She was looking at the space where Lyra was standing with the expression of someone who has spent years building a career on the documentation of other people's lives and has just encountered something that made her question whether documentation was the right response. She did not say anything into her microphone. For the first time all evening, she had nothing to say. Alaric stood 3 feet from Lyra with his hands at his sides. I watched his face work through what he had just heard, not quickly. Not with the sharp speed of someone putting a puzzle together, but slowly, the way understanding moves when it is passing through the resistance of something a person very much did not want to know. He had spent 3 months building something in his mind, A future that looked a particular way involved particular people and justified particular choices. 10 seconds of audio had described that future from the outside in terms that left no room for the interpretation he had been applying to it. Lyra turned to him. Alaric. Her voice came out softer than I had ever heard it, stripped of the warmth she had been performing, stripped of the specific vulnerability she kept ready for moments when she needed him to redirect his attention. What was underneath it was just a person who had run a calculation and found it coming up short. Baby, I can explain. Don't. The word had no anger in it. That was what made it final. Anger would have meant there was still something to fight for. The absence of it meant he had already moved past the point where fighting was an option. What you heard wasn't, I heard it, Alaric said. I heard it the same way 300 other people heard it. He did not look at her again after that. Lyra looked at me instead. Directly for the first time all evening, not the glancing peripheral awareness she had maintained when she wanted to monitor without appearing to watch. This was direct. The performance was gone. What looked out from behind her eyes was something more honest, a person assessing threat, calculating options, finding fewer of them than she had started the evening with. There are recordings, I said. My voice came out quieter than I expected. Several, in fact. My legal team will be in contact with yours regarding the relevant documentation. Whether you go by Lyra or Laura, your attorney will know how to proceed. The sentence was precise. I had rehearsed the phrasing not because I needed it to be dramatic, but because I needed it to be accurate enough that there was no room for a later claim of misrepresentation. Lyra looked at me for a long moment. Then she said in a voice so low I almost missed it beneath the sound of the water, "Who are you?" I let the question exist in the air between us, not to be theatrical, not to manufacture suspense for the 300 people who had gone so quiet I could hear the candles on the dining table burning, but because the question itself was more revealing than any answer I could have given. She had spent 3 months in proximity to this house, this property, this marriage, and she had never asked it. She had looked at me and seen exactly what she needed to see. Someone manageable, someone peripheral. Someone who could be stepped over without consequence, and she had never looked past that surface. It was the same mistake Alaric had made, the same one Melina had made, the same one Cassandra had built an entire evening's entertainment around. I turned my attention briefly to Melina. She was standing at the edge of the group looking from Lyra to Alaric to me, and back again. Her mouth slightly open in the manner of a woman who has spent decades knowing what to say in difficult situations and has just discovered she has nothing. No script, no redirect, no polished social maneuver that could reframe what 300 people had heard come out of a speaker system. Just silence, and the expression of someone watching a structure she had been confident in begin to come apart at the joints. I looked back at Lyra. At the question she was still waiting for me to answer. That, I said, is exactly what we're going to discuss next. Lyra's hand was still on her phone when the garden exhaled. Not a collective sound, more the absence of one. 300 people releasing a breath they had not known they were holding, and the silence that followed, landing the way silence lands after something irreversible complete and a little final. I let it settle for exactly 3 seconds. Then I moved. I understood waiting. I had done it for 3 years. I smoothed the front of my apron, turned away from Lyra's direction, and let my gaze travel to the head of the main banquet table, the long stretch of white linen crystal, and centerpieces that Melina Voss had personally approved 4 weeks ago. She had sent me a list. 12 items. Font preferences for the place cards included. Melina sat at the center of that table, now spine perfectly straight, as though the last 10 minutes had been a mild inconvenience rather than a structural collapse. Helen sat 2 seats to her left, hands folded in her lap, expression unreadable. The diamonds at Melina's throat caught the fairy light's 3-strand chandelier earrings, a tennis bracelet on her left wrist. Each piece had been delivered to this villa 6 days ago in a velvet-lined case with an invoice I had signed myself. Alone. Melina had asked for them to be made available for the occasion. I had agreed without argument. That agreement had an end time. That time was now. I crossed the garden at a measured pace. No urgency. Urgency would suggest I was reacting. I was not reacting. I had planned every step of this evening down to the sequence in which things would be taken back, and the diamonds came forth after the management authority, after the bag, after Lyra's file. The order mattered. Each removal needed an audience primed by the one before it. 300 guests were very well primed. Xavier fell into step beside me without a word. That was one of the things I had always respected about him. He understood timing. "Mrs. Voss," I said, stopping at the edge of the table. Melina turned slowly, as though she were doing me a favor by acknowledging the interruption. "Serafina." Her tone was the same one she used for waitstaff, cordial, dismissive, the kind of polite that is actually a category of contempt. "I assume you have something else to produce from that apron." "I do," I said, though not from the apron this time. I raised my hand slightly. It was a small gesture, barely a lift of 2 fingers, but it was the signal Marco had been waiting for at the garden entrance. 2 men in dark blazers moved through the crowd with the quiet efficiency of people who had rehearsed this. Guests stepped aside without being asked. There is something about calm authority that parts a crowd faster than any command. They stopped on either side of Melina's chair. Melina looked at them, then at me. The composure did not break. I will give her that, but something shifted behind her eyes. A rapid recalibration. She had spent the last 40 years mastering the art of reading a room, and she was reading this one now. "These pieces," I said, "were loaned from the estate inventory of Azure Bay Villa. Loan period, the duration of this evening's event. The serial numbers are registered under my name with the insurer Hartwell Group coverage policy effective since I acquired this property." I paused. 3 years, 4 months, and 11 days ago. Helen made a quiet sound, not quite a laugh. Something more like recognition. "You are not serious," Melina said. Her voice stayed level. "A remarkable performance under the circumstances." "The bracelet first, if you prefer a sequence," I said. "This is an insult." "The bracelet," Xavier said not unkindly, "has a serial number laser etched on the interior clasp. It reads AZB-J-O-0047. If you'd like to check the registry before removing it, I have the documentation on my tablet. We can do this with paperwork or without it. Either way arrives at the same result." Silence. Melina looked at the bracelet on her wrist. I watched her jaw tighten, a small, barely visible compression, and I thought about every dinner at which she had referred to me as Alaric's wife, rather than by name. Every gathering at which she had recounted, loudly and in my presence, how she had always imagined a different future for her son. Every time she had handled the objects in this house as though ownership were a matter of assumption rather than documentation. "Documentation, it turns out, is everything." "Helen," Melina said. Helen unfolded her hands. She looked at Melina with an expression that was not without sympathy. Helen was too composed a woman for open satisfaction, but she did not speak. She simply looked. Melina removed the bracelet herself. She set it on the table linen with a precision that suggested it was a choice, rather than a surrender, though we both understood it was not. The earrings followed. Then the necklace. The 3 strands required both hands and a moment of difficulty with the clasp, and no one moved to help her. One of the security guards placed a velvet tray on the table. Melina arranged each piece on it without being asked. The tray was removed. The garden was very quiet. "I want you to understand something," Melina said finally, looking directly at me. Her voice had dropped not in defeat, but in a register that was meant for my ears only. "Whatever you think you've accomplished tonight, I think I've recovered my property," I said, "in front of the people you invited to witness how well your family manages it." Helen rose from her chair. She touched Melina's shoulder once, a brief, deliberate contact, and then picked up her evening bag. She looked at me. The look lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Then she said quietly and without drama, "You have a beautiful home." She walked toward the garden's side exit without looking back. Her heels were measured on the stone path. Then they were gone. Melina sat very still. Across the garden, I saw Alaric standing near the fountain. He had watched the entire exchange from a distance of perhaps 30 feet, and he had not moved once. Not when the guards approached, not when the bracelet came off, not when Helen left. Now he moved. He did not come toward me. He turned his eyes, finding Xavier, and he began to cross the garden in Xavier's direction, the particular kind of movement that belongs to a man who believes he still has a negotiation available to him. He did not know yet that negotiation had ended 3 envelopes ago. I watched him walk and said nothing. There was nothing left to say in this sequence. The next sequence belonged to a different kind of document. For 3 years, Alaric had spoken Xavier Hartwell's name the way certain men speak the names of saints, with reverence calibrated precisely to the distance between where they stood and where they wanted to be. I had heard it at dinner tables in the car once at 2 in the morning when he thought I was asleep, and he was sitting at his desk running numbers that didn't belong to him. Xavier Hartwell's Regional Alliance just closed a corridor deal that netted $42 million in 18 months. I had lain in the dark, listening to the particular quality of want in his voice. Not admiration, not inspiration, but appetite. The kind of want that does not ask whether a thing is yours. It only asks how quickly it can be taken. Tonight, Xavier Hartwell was standing 3 steps away from him. I watched Alaric close the distance. He moved with the deliberate ease of a man who has rehearsed this approach, shoulders back, chin level. The small performance of a person who wishes to appear as though the moment is ordinary, when it is in fact the only moment that has mattered to him in 18 months. He had prepared for this. I knew the precise shape of his preparation because I had watched him build it from the blueprint up, and he had never once thought to check who was watching. Xavier. His voice was even, controlled. But I was close enough to hear the thing beneath the control, a thread of urgency pulled almost too tight. "Whatever is happening tonight, whatever she's told you, I need 5 minutes. The regional supply contract. I've been building this proposal for 18 months. "I know," Xavier said. Alaric's confidence absorbed that recalibrated. "Then you know it's solid. The numbers hold. The logistics are clean. All I need is your signature on the framework, and we can formalize terms by the end of next week." "Alaric?" Xavier's tone did not rise. He didn't need volume. He had the particular authority of someone who has never needed to raise his voice to end a conversation. "I don't sign contracts at birthday parties, and I don't sign contracts with individuals I don't have a verified working relationship with. We have a relationship. I've been in contact for months." "Contact is not a relationship," Xavier said. He looked at Alaric steadily. "I have exactly 1 verified business relationship in this family, and it is not with you." Alaric stopped. I watched him parse that sentence, watched it arrive in pieces, the noun, then the verb, then the implication behind both, the way complex information arrives when a person is simultaneously receiving it and resisting it. His gaze stayed on Xavier. Then slowly, with the careful reluctance of a man turning to see something he does not want, confirmed, he looked to his left. He found me standing 8 feet away. Apron still on. Hands at my sides. "Serafina." I said nothing. "What is your relationship with Xavier Hartwell?" From somewhere in the gathered periphery of the garden, I heard Diana's voice drop into her microphone just above a whisper, threaded with the particular breathlessness of someone watching something arrive that they had suspected but not confirmed. "Okay, everyone. Okay. I think I know what's happening. I think I know who she is." Oh my God. 300 guests were pretending not to listen. They were listening to every syllable. Alaric looked at me, and what I saw in his face in that moment was something I had not expected to feel anything about, and did not precisely feel anything about, except to note it with the same precise attention I had applied to every document, every delayed payment. Every night he had come home smelling of a perfume that was not mine and offered no explanation because he had never considered one necessary. The contempt was gone. The authority was gone. Even the performance of composure which he had maintained through every reveal tonight, with a determination I could objectively respect, was beginning to show the stress fractures. What remained was a question. One question, very simple, that he should have asked 3 years ago at a dinner table in a city neither of us lived in any more on the night we first talked long enough to matter. "Who are you?" I held his gaze. Then I let my eyes move just once briefly to the surface of Azure Bay beyond the garden's far edge. Black water in the dark. The lights of the party reflecting in fragments across it, breaking and reforming with every small movement of the surface. I had stood on this property at 11 in the morning with an escrow officer and signed my name on a document that made it mine, and Alaric had been in a meeting across the city that day, pursuing something he believed was more important. He had been wrong about that too. "You had 3 years to ask me that question, Alaric," I said. My voice was quiet. The fountain covered it for everyone except him, and Xavier, who had taken one measured step back, not retreating, only making room. 3 years, and you never did. The silence between us lasted 4 seconds. Xavier broke it not loudly, not with drama, but with the flat, even clarity of a man stating a navigational fact. "To be precise about it, the contract you've been pursuing for the last 18 months, the one you've revised 4 times and pitched to 3 different intermediaries." He paused. "The person who decides that contract has been standing in your kitchen since 5 o'clock this evening, wearing an apron." Someone nearby made a sound that was not quite a gasp, not quite a laugh. The specific human sound of comprehension arriving faster than the social capacity to process it. Alaric did not make any sound. He looked at me the way a person looks at a room they have walked through 1,000 times when someone removes the wallpaper and they see for the first time what the walls are actually made of. Not shock exactly. Something slower and more permanent than shock. Something that would still be there in 6 months, in 2 years. In whatever life reassembled itself after tonight, I let him look. This was the only moment I intended to give him the space between the implication and the word, between the shape of the truth and its formal articulation. Task 12 would carry the words. That part was already prepared. But here in this corner next to this fountain, with the sound of the water and the distant jazz and 300 people pretending to look elsewhere, I gave him the shape. He looked at me like I was a stranger. Good, I thought. That means he's finally seeing me correctly. Everything you have watched so far, the apron, the envelopes, the silence, the tea tray, was preparation for this moment. Before I reveal who Serafina really is and what these 3 years were truly about, drop the number 12 in the comments. Just that. Let me know you are still here because what comes next reframes everything. Note this story contains fictional elements shaped for educational purposes. Names and details are coincidental, but what this woman did and why she did it will stay with you long after the story ends. The name had lived in this house for 3 years. I had heard it at the dinner table, Alaric's voice carrying that particular elevation men use when they want to be overheard, recounting meetings he had attended at the edges of rooms where the solitaire group's representatives had been present. I had heard it in the car on Sunday mornings, when he reviewed his pipeline and spoke to the windshield about deals that were almost within reach. I had heard it on a Sunday morning in the car, his voice carrying the particular elevation of a man rehearsing a pitch. He had not yet been given the room to deliver. If I could get an audience with the principal just one meeting, everything changes. He had been speaking to the windshield. I had been sitting in the passenger seat. He had never thought to wonder whether the person who kept refilling his coffee cup had built the thing he was chasing. I walked back to the center of the garden. Not quickly. There was no urgency in the way I moved. Urgency would have implied I was reacting to something. And I had not been in a reactive position since 6 o'clock that morning when I had signed the last of 4 documents at a desk in my private office on the villa's 3rd floor. The floor that Alaric had used perhaps twice in 3 years because I had told him early on that it was mostly storage. It was not mostly storage. I stopped at the head of the main table. The same table where the white envelope had landed 2 hours ago. The same table where Melina's jewelry had sat on velvet 40 minutes ago. Tables, I had learned, had an extraordinary capacity to hold the weight of what people place on them. I reached into the inside panel of the apron, not the pocket where the navy envelope had been, but the interior panel sewn flush against the lining, invisible unless you knew it was there, and removed a small flat badge. Corporate issue. The kind that opens doors in 14 countries. I set it on the table. My name, I said, is Serafina Voss née Caldwell. I am the founder and chief executive officer of the Solitaire Group, a luxury asset and fine jewelry holding corporation operating across 14 countries. With annual revenue sufficient to make the contract Alaric has been pursuing for 18 months look like a rounding error on a quarterly report. The garden did not make a sound. Diana set her camera on the table beside her, slowly, with both hands. She sat down in the nearest chair, not because she had chosen to sit, but because her legs had apparently made the choice for her. She did not speak. It was, I noted, the first time all evening she had been without words. I have lived in this house for 3 years as a woman who appeared by all observable metrics to be ordinary. I did this because I needed to understand who Alaric Voss was when he believed no one of consequence was watching. I kept my voice level, not cold, not theatrical. Factual. The register I used in boardrooms when I wanted the numbers to speak without interference from emotion. Before I considered him for a senior position within my organization, I needed to observe his character, his judgment, and the particular shape of his integrity when he thought the stakes were low. Alaric had not moved from the fountain. He was standing exactly where I had left him, and he was looking at me the way a man looks at a map that has just redrawn itself around him. "You tested me," he said. His voice was rough at the edges, not a question, not an accusation. A man reading a sentence he did not know how to finish. "I evaluated a candidate," I said. "There is a distinction. For 3 years. Certain evaluations require time to be conclusive. And the word came out stripped of everything except the need to know. What was your conclusion?" I looked at him steadily. Tonight answered every question I had remaining. The silence that followed had a specific texture, not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of two, many people processing the same information simultaneously and not yet knowing what to do with their faces. Melina found her voice first. She always had. It was the quality I had observed most consistently about her across 3 years, the capacity to locate language faster than most people locate footing. "This is not possible," she said. You were carrying a tea tray." "I was carrying a tea tray because I chose to carry a tea tray," I said. "No one in this family has ever compelled me to do anything I did not choose to do. That is the precise distinction between my position and the one you assigned to me, Mrs. Voss. I would ask you to note it." Melina's mouth closed. From the kitchen entrance, I heard the particular rhythm of footsteps I had recognized since the first week of this arrangement, measured unhurried. The walk of a man who has never needed to announce himself because his presence has always been the kind that rooms simply reorganize around. Marco came through the garden door. He removed his apron as he crossed the terrace, folded it once, set it on the edge of the serving cart with the deliberate finality of a man completing the last item on a list. He walked to where I stood and stopped 2 feet behind my right shoulder. Not beside me. Behind. The placement of a person whose role is not equality, but alignment. "Marco Reeves," I said, has served as my chief of operations for 11 years. He has been present in this household for the duration of the evaluation period. Every logistical element you have observed tonight, the security team, the audio system, the documentation timing, Mr. Hartwell's invitation was coordinated through him. Cassandra was staring at Marco with the specific expression of a woman recalculating 3 years of conversation she had held in his presence over plates of food he had prepared. He cooked for us. Tikakal, she said. Her voice had gone flat. For 3 years he cooked for us. He kept me informed, I said. For 3 years. The distinction landed the way I had intended it to, not as cruelty, but as precision. There is a difference between a knife and a scalpel. One is blunt. One is accurate. Alaric had not sat down. He had not moved at all. But something was happening to his posture, a slow, incremental compression, as though the weight of the last 8 minutes was physical, and he was measuring in real time how much of it his spine could continue to bear. This house, he said, quietly, as though testing the words before he committed to them. This house was never mine. Azure Bay Villa is a registered business asset of the Solitaire Group, I said. I granted you temporary management rights as a component of the evaluation framework. I wanted to observe how you treated something you believed was yours. Something you believed you held through proximity to me rather than through any claim of your own. And how did I treat it? I looked at him. You handed the legal owner of this property an eviction notice. I said, at her own birthday party in front of 300 people with her name on a document you had no standing to sign. Alaric's legs did not buckle. He sat down slowly, deliberately into the nearest chair, the specific movement of a man choosing to sit before his body removes the choice. His hands rested on his knees. He looked at the middle distance. He said nothing. The garden held its breath. Xavier stood near the terrace steps, one hand in his jacket pocket. Diana had her camera in her lap and had not raised it. Lyra was somewhere near the east hedge. I could see her in my peripheral vision, very still. Melina sat rigid at the table, the diamonds gone from her wrists and throat. Her hands folded with a precision that cost her something visible. Cassandra was looking at Marco with an expression that had moved through shock and was now settling into something harder and more private. I reached forward and picked up the corporate badge from the table, placed it back inside the apron panel. But, I said, that is not the last thing I discovered about this family tonight. I paused. There is one more. In business, the most dangerous adversary is never the one who announces themselves. It is not the competitor who sends a formal bid, the firm that files a counter-proposal. The rival who calls your investors and makes their intentions plain. Those people can be anticipated. Their movements have logic. Their motivations have structure. And structure, however hostile, can be mapped. The dangerous ones are the people at your dinner table. The ones who pass the bread and pour the wine and sit in your kitchen on Sunday mornings eating food prepared by a man they believed was only a chef. And the entire time they are cataloging what they overhear, and somewhere in a guest bedroom on the second floor, a screen is glowing with a conversation they are not supposed to be having. I picked up the tablet from the table beside me. I had carried it inside the villa at 7:15, retrieved it from the third-floor office during the brief window when the garden's attention was on Melina's jewelry. No one had noticed me go. That was by now an established pattern. People rarely track the movements of someone they have already decided is beneath their attention. I set the tablet on the table in front of Alaric. The screen showed a file directory, time-stamped entries. An IP address log from the villa's internal network cross-referenced against a communications record from a firm called Meridian Holdings, registered in Delaware principal offices in San Francisco. 3 months ago, I said, proprietary information relating to the Solitaire Group's Pacific Corridor expansion strategy was transmitted to Meridian Holdings, our primary competitor in the Western regional market. I kept my voice even. The leak included internal revenue projections for the next 3 fiscal quarters, draft supplier agreements at pre-negotiation rates, and a timeline of acquisition targets that had not been disclosed to anyone outside the organization's senior leadership. Alaric stared at the screen. I watched his eyes move across the data, the specific movement of a man reading something that is simultaneously familiar and incomprehensible. This is my expansion proposal. The regional framework I built. How does Meridian have the IP address? Xavier said, stepping forward. Traces directly to the guest suite on the second floor. The room with the ring lighting, the tripod mount on the east wall, and the live stream equipment I finished. The garden was very quiet. Alaric turned toward Cassandra. The motion was slow, the deliberate slowness of a person who has already completed the calculation and is simply waiting for the physical world to catch up with the conclusion. Cassandra took one step back. She was still holding her phone. She had been holding it all evening, the device that had opened this night, that had turned 300 guests into an audience before the first envelope was ever produced. The phone that had also, it turned out, been the instrument of something considerably more consequential than a birthday live stream. Alaric. Her voice was the voice of someone negotiating the distance between an explanation and an excuse. I didn't understand how serious it was. You sold my expansion strategy. His voice carried no inflection, no anger, no heat, the affectless register of a person for whom the emotion has not yet located its correct form. I needed the money. She said it quickly, the way people say things they have been holding in long enough that the release comes faster than the consideration. The bags, the trips. Everything I've been doing, I'm in debt, Alaric. 50,000. There was someone who contacted me through a private channel. They said it was market research. They were willing to pay for background information on regional development strategies, and I didn't. Market research, he said. That's what they called it. Cassandra. One word. The particular weight of a name spoken by someone who has removed everything from it except the need to be heard. You sold my work to the people who are trying to destroy what I spent 18 months building for a shopping budget. It wasn't just for what it was for. He said no longer matters. I watched him. And in his face, beneath the controlled tone, beneath the flattened register, I saw something I had not anticipated seeing. Not anger. Not the cold. Strategic recalibration I had observed when I served him the Navy envelope. Not the desperation from the fountain or the disbelief from Task 11. Something older than those things. Something that sits underneath ambition and contempt, and every performed version of a person, and surfaces only when the one they trusted longest proves they were never trustworthy at all. I knew that particular fracture. I had carried a version of it myself for 36 months. I had not expected to recognize it on his face, and I found that recognition neither satisfying nor comfortable. It simply was. Xavier spoke without moving from where he stood. The damage to Alaric's proposal is recoverable. Meridian received the framework without the supporting authorization documents, which limits what they can execute. The damage to the Solitaire Group's acquisition timeline is not recoverable in the same quarter. He paused. Which is why this matter will be processed through legal channels. The documentation is already with our counsel. Cassandra's eyes moved to me. They were red at the edges, not from crying, not yet, but from the particular physiological response of someone who has been maintaining composure under conditions that no longer support it. Are you going to have me arrested? That, I said, depends on what your attorney advises you to do in the next 48 hours. She looked at the fake Hermes bag still sitting on the corner of the table. Xavier had set it there after the authentication scene, and no one had moved it. It sat exactly where he had placed it, a grade 3 replica on white linen under fairy lights in front of 300 people whose phones had been recording since 5 o'clock. The comments from Cassandra's own live stream, which had gone dark almost an hour ago, were still accumulating on a broadcast she could no longer control. Everything she had constructed tonight, the image, the occasion, The specific architecture of aspiration she had built in this garden over 4.5 hours had been disassembled piece by piece, and the last piece had just been removed by her own admission. Diana, who had been silent for longer than at any point since her arrival, lifted her face from somewhere private. She spoke into her microphone, not performing, not narrating, just speaking with the flat exhaustion of someone who had witnessed more than their professional context had prepared them for. "I came here tonight to film a birthday party," she said quietly. "I genuinely do not know what I'm going to do with everything I have on this camera." No one answered her. Alaric looked at the tablet for a long moment. Then he looked at me. "Is there more?" His voice had lost its architecture entirely. No register, no performance, no carefully maintained surface. Just the question stripped to its structure. I held his gaze. "One last thing," I said. "And this one is specifically for you. Some marriages end with noise, arguments that carry through walls, voices that find registers they have never used in ordinary conversation, doors that close with a force calibrated to communicate what words have failed to. Some marriages end in paperwork, a process so procedural, so stripped of ceremony, that the ending arrives not as a moment, but as a series of appointments. And some marriages end in the specific silence of a person who realizes, standing in a garden they thought they knew, that they have been looking at someone for 3 years without ever once actually seeing them. The guests had shifted, not left. They did not have the resolution for that. And the night had not yet given them permission, but pulled back by some collective social instinct to a distance that acknowledged this part is not for us. Alaric and I stood perhaps 6 feet apart. The fountain was too far away to hear now. The jazz had stopped some time ago. I wasn't certain exactly when. Only that at some point the musicians had understood that the room no longer had use for their particular contribution. The fairy lights were still on. They would stay on until I turned them off, because they were on a timer I had set, and nothing that happened tonight had changed the timer. "How long?" Alaric asked. His voice had no surface to it anymore, no architecture, no performance, just the question in its plainest form. "How long have you known?" "I knew who you were," I said, "by the 2nd month of our marriage." He absorbed that. "I stayed for 2 more years because I wanted to be wrong." "And were you—" I let the question sit for a moment. Not to be cruel, cruelty would have required me to enjoy this, and I did not enjoy this. I had never wanted this outcome. I had wanted the opposite outcome, which was why I had stayed 34 months past the point at which a strictly rational person would have closed the file. "No," I said. He looked at the ground, then back at me. "Serafina." My name in his mouth the way it had sounded before it became a transaction. "Everything tonight at the house, the contract, the position I could have had, I didn't know. I genuinely didn't know what you were, what you'd built." "I understand that," I said. "Then you have to understand that if I had known, that's exactly the problem." I kept my voice even. Not cold. Evenness and coldness are different things, and I needed him to hear the distinction. "You didn't know because you never asked. You looked at me and made a determination in the first 60 seconds, and after that determination was made, you stopped looking." I paused. "You saw a woman you believed was beneath you, and you stopped paying attention. That's not a failure of information. That's a failure of character. If I had known who you really were, you would have treated me differently for the wrong reasons." The words came out with the same precision I used in boardrooms, but the feeling beneath them was something boardrooms never required. That is not what I needed from a husband. I did not need a man who would respect me because of what I owned or what I ran or whose name was on which document. I needed a man who would treat me with basic human decency because I was standing in front of him. He was quiet. The silence had weight. The particular weight of a true thing landing in a space where there has been too much that was not true. "What did you need?" he asked, not defensive, something underneath that. A man asking a question he is afraid already has an answer. Someone who would treat me well precisely when they thought I had nothing to offer. He closed his eyes briefly, opened them. I failed that. You failed that, I said. Not only tonight. You failed it the first time your mother called me a liability in your presence and you said nothing. You failed it the first time Lyra's name appeared on a phone screen turned face down on a kitchen counter, and you offered no explanation because you had concluded one wasn't necessary. You failed it every morning you walked through the kitchen where I was working and did not speak, because you had decided without ever formally deciding that I was not a person whose attention was worth seeking. I watched each sentence arrive in his face, not performing the watching, simply noting with the same precise attention I had applied to 36 months of accumulated observation, how a human face receives the weight of its own history. I can fix it, he said, almost a whisper now. The register of a man who knows the statement is not true and says it anyway, because the alternative is accepting what cannot be undone. Tell me what to fix and I'll fix all of it. I looked at him. I had known this man at dinners and in cars and at 2 in the morning when the house was quiet and the bay was black outside every window. I had chosen him once, for reasons that seemed sufficient at the time: his intelligence, the particular energy he brought into a room, the way he had looked at me briefly in the early months, as though I was the most interesting thing in his vicinity. I had waited for 34 months after that brief period for that version of him to return. It had not returned. You cannot fix a test you've already completed, I said. You can only move forward from the result. He looked at me for a long moment. Then his gaze moved past me, past the table, past the gathered periphery of 300 people pretending not to witness the end of something. It moved to the water. Azure Bay, flat and dark beyond the garden's far edge, holding the light of the party in fragments on its surface, breaking, reforming, breaking again with every small current. It was the first time I had ever seen Alaric look at that water without calculating it, without assigning it a value, a square footage, a position in some imagined portfolio. He looked at it the way a person looks at something they are seeing for the first time, or perhaps for the last time, when both sensations feel similar. What about us? He asked. His voice was very quiet. There is no version of us, I said, that exists outside of what you believed about me. You married a woman you thought was ordinary. She was never ordinary. And I don't think you would love the real version of her, not the CEO, not the test maker, not the woman who has been taking notes for 3 years. I don't think that's the woman you wanted. You don't know what I wanted. No, I agreed. And that is perhaps the most honest thing about this entire marriage. After 3 years, neither of us knew what the other one actually wanted. We were both working from a version of the other person that we had constructed without sufficient data. He was quiet for a long time. Then very quietly, the 5 days. That was real. I looked at him steadily. Everything I said tonight was real, I said. That is something I cannot say about this marriage. The water moved in the bay. The lights continued to break and reform across its surface. Somewhere behind us, in the gathered distance of 300 people, someone coughed. Someone else shifted their weight on gravel. Alaric said nothing. I had not expected him to. I put the apron on at 4:45 this afternoon. I stood in front of the bedroom mirror on the 2nd floor and tied the strings deliberately, not quickly, not from habit, but with the same measured attention I use when signing a document that carries consequence. Each loop pulled to the same tension, each knot set to hold. I wore it through everything. Through Marco's final walkthrough and the caterers arranging 300 place settings. Through Cassandra's opening livestream and Lyra's entrance, and Alaric straightening his jacket in the foyer without once looking to see whether I was watching. Through every envelope, every revelation, every moment in which someone in this garden decided, consciously or not, that a woman in a white cotton apron did not require their full attention. I had been counting on that decision. Now I walked to the center of the garden. Not the table, not the terrace. The exact center equidistant from the fountain and the main gate, where the fairy lights converged overhead, and every sight line in the garden was unobstructed. I had identified this position 3 years ago when I first walked the property. I had filed it under for later. Later was now. I reached back and pulled the bow free. One end, then the other. The loop at the front. 30 seconds, perhaps less. The garden did not make a sound. Not because the motion was dramatic, it was entirely ordinary. But 300 people had spent the last 3.5 hours learning not to assume anything in this garden was ordinary, and they had finally learned it well. I folded the apron once and laid it on the nearest table. Beneath it was the black dress I had put on at 4:30 before the apron covered it. Minimal. No jewelry. I had never needed jewelry in a room where I intended to be the primary thing worth looking at. Marco stood at the garden's edge near the kitchen. Dark jacket hands at his sides, the jacket he wears to board meetings, not to kitchens. He watched me with the expression of a man who has worked 11 years toward a single moment and recognizes it when it arrives. He gave me one nod. Small. Sufficient. Diana had not raised her camera. It sat in her lap screen up while she watched me with the particular stillness of someone deciding in real time whether a moment belongs to them or to the person in it. Cassandra was looking at the apron on the table. I watched the understanding cross her face, slow, resistant the way understanding moves when it requires a person to revise a belief they held without examination. She had read that apron all evening as evidence of something beneath her. She was now reading what it had actually been, a costume, worn by someone who had written her own role, assembled her own audience, and chosen her own timing. The apron had been the instrument of a performance she had scripted entirely herself, and the performance was now complete. Melina sat at the far end of the table. No jewelry, no Helen, no position left to stand on. She looked at me with the expression of a woman measuring something she had consistently underestimated, and finding too late that her scale had been wrong from the beginning. She did not speak. For the first time all evening, I believed she genuinely did not know what to say. Alaric stood near the fountain. He had not moved since our conversation ended. He was looking at me now without calculation, without performance, without the reconstructed composure he had maintained through the earlier hours. He was looking at me the way you look at something when every framework you use to interpret it has been removed and only the thing itself remains. It was the most honest his face had ever been in my presence. I did not move toward him. This moment was not for any one person. It was for the room, which meant it belonged to no one's reaction in particular. I wore this apron tonight, I said, pitching my voice for a room rather than a stage, because I needed every person here to see me exactly as they had already decided to see me. Not who I am, who they assumed I was. I kept the cadence even. I have been dismissed in this house, ignored, handed an eviction notice at my own birthday party in my own home by a man who had been granted temporary access to a property he never once owned. A beat. I wore the apron because I needed them to be certain before I showed them the truth. Certainty is the condition that makes the truth arrive correctly. I looked briefly, without drama, across Melina, Cassandra, Lyra, Alaric. 4 people who had constructed an entire evening on a version of me they had never verified. Now you know who you were dealing with. The first applause came from the left side of the garden. One guest. Quiet, deliberate, the sound of someone responding to something real rather than something performed. A second person joined, then a third. By the time it reached the full garden, it was not the noise of entertainment. It was 300 people recognizing something true and acknowledging it the only way available to them. Diana looked at her camera, then at me. Then she lifted it slowly with both hands and turned it toward her own face. I came here tonight to film a birthday party, she said into the lens. No performance in it. No framing for an algorithm. I'm leaving with the most important thing I've ever recorded. She paused. And I haven't decided whether to post it. Because some moments are too real to become content. I think this one belongs to itself. She lowered the camera. Xavier appeared at my right, quiet, unhurried. Ready, he said. I looked back at the villa, second floor, the lit window of the master bedroom. The mirror I had stood in front of at 4:45, tying the strings of an apron I had worn as armor, as instrument, as the most deliberate choice of the entire evening. Almost, I said. One more thing. Earlier tonight at 6:15 p.m., Alaric Voss stood at this table and gave me 5 days to vacate a property I have owned for 3 years, 4 months, and 11 days. He said it in front of 300 people. He said it with the confidence of a man who had already decided how the evening would end. I had let him say it. I had counted on him saying it, in fact, because a reversal only lands with full weight when the audience has been present for the original statement. 300 people had heard the original statement. 300 people were still here. You gave me 5 days, I said to Alaric. I kept my voice at the same register I had used all evening, not raised, not theatrical, simply clear enough to be heard at the distance of a garden. I'm going to return the courtesy. He looked at me. He did not speak. That was, I had learned over 3 years what Alaric Voss did when he had nothing left to construct. He went quiet and he waited, and he hoped that silence might function as a kind of reprieve. It would not function as a reprieve tonight. I looked at each of them in turn. Alaric first, then Melina, then Cassandra. Then Lyra and I addressed each one separately because the terms were separate, and because I wanted no ambiguity about which portion of this belonged to whom. Alaric. I held his gaze. You have 5 days to return the full amount withdrawn from our joint accounts over the past 18 months for purposes unrelated to household expenditure. My legal team has complete statements every transfer, every date, every destination account. I paused. The figure is not small. I want you to have that number clearly in mind when you speak to your attorney tomorrow morning, which I strongly recommend you do before the morning is over. Serafina. He took one step forward. I'm not finished, I said, not unkind, not harsh, the tone of a person who has a list and intends to complete it. He stopped. I turned to Melina. She was sitting very straight at the far end of the table, the posture she maintained in every room she entered. The physical assertion of a woman who had decided long ago that bearing was its own form of authority. The jewelry was gone from her wrists and throat. The authority looked considerably less convincing without it. Mrs. Voss, I said, the jewelry has been returned. But there are additional matters. 2 vehicles registered under a shell company that traces back to a credit line secured against this property without my knowledge or consent. Furnishings removed from this villa over the past 14 months, itemized and photographed. And a promissory note signed in Alaric's name, but guaranteed by an asset he did not own. That comes due in 11 days. I let that land. 5 days to begin the resolution process. All documentation is already with my counsel. Melina's jaw tightened. You cannot simply... She can, Xavier said. He had moved to stand slightly behind my left shoulder, and he said it the way people state weather conditions factual, without investment in whether the fact is welcome. And she will. The lien against this property is fraudulent under California civil statute. That's not a negotiating position. That's the legal landscape. Melina looked at Xavier, then at me. She closed her mouth. I moved on. Cassandra. She was sitting in the chair she had dropped into after the trade secrets admission not dramatically collapsed, just seated with the particular exhaustion of someone who has run out of the energy required to perform composure. She looked up when I said her name. The legal matter relating to the Meridian disclosure will be handled through separate proceedings, and you should retain an attorney before 48 hours have passed. That is not a threat. That is a practical recommendation. I kept my voice even. Separately, the purchases made on the solitaire corporate subaccount over the past 7 months, routed through Alaric's business card. Total a figure that will be referred to collections in 5 days if unaddressed. I'd suggest reviewing the cardholder agreement. The liability language in Section 4 is particularly relevant to your situation. I didn't know it was your account, Cassandra said. Her voice was low, not defensive anymore, just depleted. You used a corporate card for personal purchases, I said. The account it drew from is not your concern to have known. The liability is yours regardless. I paused. I'm not telling you this to compound the evening. I'm telling you because the alternative is finding out from a collections notice, and that is a worse way to receive the information. She said nothing. She looked at the fake Hermes bag still sitting on the corner of the table, the bag that had opened this night, that had been the first thing Xavier dismantled, that had started the particular unraveling that led to here. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked away. I turned to Lyra. She had been standing near the east hedge since task 9, very still, very contained, the specific stillness of a person who has decided that the least visible position is the safest one. She looked at me when I turned. Laura, I said, using the name from the investigation file. My attorneys will contact whatever legal representation you retain. I recommend you find representation before the end of tomorrow. I held her gaze for exactly 3 seconds, not threatening, not triumphant. Informational. That is all I have for you tonight. Lyra said nothing. She gave the smallest possible nod, barely a movement more, an acknowledgement that the words had arrived, than any response to their content. Xavier stepped forward. For the record, he said, addressing the garden rather than any individual, the voice he used in Alliance forums precise, and carrying as chair of the Regional Trade Alliance. I want to state formally that the Solitaire Group remains a fully protected and standing partner of this alliance. Any attempt to leverage tonight's events to damage the company's commercial standing or reputation will be met with the full legal resources of the alliance. He paused. That statement will be in writing by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. He looked at Alaric. You had a genuine opportunity, Alaric. That is the part of this that I find most not tragic exactly. Instructive. You had access to something most people spend entire careers trying to reach, and you spent 3 years looking past it. He picked up his jacket from the back of the nearest chair. I hope the next 3 years are more productive for you. Alaric did not answer. The garden held its silence. At some point during the last hour, the jazz quartet had packed their instruments. I was not certain when I only knew that where there had been music, there was now only the sound that had always been beneath it. Beneath everything constant and indifferent to every document and revelation and collapse the evening had produced. The sound of Azure Bay, water against the base of the property, steady patient, entirely uninterested in the particular human drama unfolding above it. I turned toward the main entrance of the villa, not to go inside, not yet. There was one more thing, the last thing I had prepared this morning, before the apron, before the envelopes, before any of it. Something I had placed on the desk in the third-floor office at 8:45 a.m. and left there, waiting for the moment that everything else had made space for it. That moment was now. There are places you leave without looking back, and there are places you leave slowly, not because you are uncertain, not because the leaving requires persuasion, but because you want to carry the precise shape of the moment with you, the exact quality of the light, the particular way the water sounds from this elevation, the weight of a decision that has been 3 years in the making, finally completed, finally irreversible. I walked through the main entrance of Azure Bay Villa for what I understood without needing to announce it would be the last time I crossed that threshold as its resident. The foyer was quiet. The sounds of the garden, the remaining guests, the low murmur of a party that had transformed entirely from what it was intended to be, reached me as a kind of background frequency, distant and undemanding. I moved through the foyer without stopping to the staircase and climbed without hurrying. The second floor was still. The bedroom door was open the way I had left it at 4:45 this afternoon, when I came downstairs with the apron on and the navy envelope in the inside pocket. The fairy lights from the garden threw fragmented reflections through the window onto the far wall, shifting, reforming. The same broken pattern I had watched from this room on 100 evenings over 3 years. On the nightstand on Alaric's side of the bed was the white envelope I had placed there at 8:45 this morning. Before the apron, before the caterers, before any of it. I did not pick it up. It was not mine to carry out of the room. It was exactly where it needed to be, and it would remain there until he came upstairs and found it. And found inside it the one document that completed everything the evening had begun. The dissolution petition filed at 9 a.m. with the county clerk, signed by me, notarized, and timestamped before a single guest had arrived. I looked at the envelope for a moment. Then I looked past it through the window. Azure Bay at night. The water was black at the surface and carrying the lights of the garden in long, broken fragments, the same orange gold of the fairy lights Melina had specified. Reflected back by a bay that had no opinion about specifications, no investment in occasions, no awareness that the evening below had gone considerably differently than anyone except one person had planned. The water moved the way it always moved, steady, patient, indifferent in the most clarifying possible way. 3 years, I thought, and it ends here, in this room, with this view. I had always loved this window more than anything else in the house. I turned and walked back to the door. Marco was at the foot of the staircase. He was not waiting in the posture of a man who had been standing there long. He had the particular quality of someone who had simply arrived at the right moment, which was, I had learned over 11 years, one of his most consistent professional attributes. The chef's whites were gone. In their place, the dark jacket he wore to quarterly reviews and alliance meetings and every occasion at which his actual role became visible rather than assumed. "Kitchen is clean," he said. "All equipment retrieved. Security team is pulling out now, last vehicle in 10 minutes. "Thank you, Marco." He nodded once. The same nod from across the garden earlier, small, precise, the nod of a man who considers brevity a form of respect. Then he paused. He looked at the staircase briefly, then back at me. And something crossed his face that in 11 years of professional association I had seen perhaps 4 times, the expression that exists just beneath the operational surface of a person who is very good at keeping the two things separate. "This was a good house to work in," he said, "even when it wasn't easy." "It was," I agreed. We stood in the foyer for exactly 1 more second. It was, I thought, the correct amount of time for what needed to be acknowledged without being named. "Let's go," I said. Diana was standing near the garden gate. Her camera was in her right hand, powered down. The lens cap replaced the body language of a device that has been set aside, rather than stored. She was not blocking the path. She was simply present in the way she had been present all evening, positioned to observe, rather than intercept until she decided otherwise. She decided otherwise now. "Ms. Caldwell," she said. I stopped. She had used the name from the corporate badge. Not Voss. The name, I had been born with the name on the founding documents of the Solitaire Group. The name that would appear on the dissolution petition filed that morning. "I'm not going to post it," she said. "The footage from tonight. I wanted you to hear that directly." I looked at her for a moment. 27 years old, 500,000 followers. A camera she had been pointing at the world long enough to develop instincts about what the world did and did not deserve to see. "You can post it if you want to, Diana," I said. "The truth doesn't require my protection." She absorbed that. A small, slow nod, the nod of someone filing something away rather than responding to it immediately. "I know," she said. I think some things are more true if they're not turned into content. I'm still figuring out where the line is." "That," I said, "is the right question to be sitting with." I walked past her through the gate. The driveway was quiet. Xavier's car was waiting at the bottom of the steps, dark, low engine already running. The driver having been briefed on timing with the same precision that governed every other element of the evening. Xavier fell into step beside me at the gate unhurried. saying nothing until we had covered half the distance to the car. "Where to?" he said. "The office," I said. "The Pacific expansion meeting has been postponed for 3 months because of the leak. It's time to reschedule." He glanced at me. "Tonight." "The night is long," I said, "and we have work to do." He opened the car door. I got in. I did not look back toward the garden as the door closed. Not because I had no feeling about the place I had spent 3 years inside those walls. And feeling is not a condition that requires performance to be real. But I had said everything that needed saying. I had done everything that needed doing. I had given every last measure of patience I had brought into this evening exactly where it was intended to go, in exactly the sequence I had planned. There was nothing left in that garden that belonged to me. The car moved down the coastal road. Through the window, Azure Bay spread out to the south, black water. No lights on its surface from this angle, just the open sound of it through the glass. Xavier looked over. "5 days, then," he said. I watched the water for a moment. 5 days, I said. "And then we find out what people are made of when the clock runs out." The road curved. The lights of Azure Bay Villa, still lit, still dressed for a birthday party that had become something else entirely, appeared briefly in the rear window. Then the curve took them, and they were gone. I did not track them during those 5 days. I had deadlines. I had a Pacific Corridor meeting that had been postponed for 3 months and needed a new timeline. I had a company to run and a board to update, and a set of acquisition targets that had not moved simply because one evening in a villa by the bay had required my full attention. The 5 days passed the way productive days pass, fully without gap. But by the time the 5th day ended, I already knew the results before anyone called. Alaric filed for uncontested dissolution on day 3. Not because he had arrived at some sudden generosity of spirit. His attorney had apparently been quite clear about the specific inadvisability of contesting a settlement when the opposing party held 18 months of documented financial records. A notarized filing time-stamped 9 hours before the evening began, and the kind of organizational infrastructure that does not lose paperwork. The restitution arrived by wire transfer on day 4 precise, to the figure my legal team had specified, not $1 over, not $1 under. I noted it. I did not feel the particular satisfaction people expect you to feel when something owed is returned. You feel something quieter than that. Something that is less about the amount and more about the fact that the account is now clean and the number no longer belongs in the same sentence as his name. Melina returned 2 of the 3 assets by day 4, the third a vehicle registered under the shell company. The one with the fraudulent lien required an additional 10 days and a formal written notice from our legal department before it was resolved. I was told, through a channel I neither requested nor discouraged, that she had moved to a cousin's property in the outer suburbs. Helen Marsh had not contacted her once in those 5 days. On the morning of day 4, Helen sent me a message, brief, direct, the communication style of a woman who has thought carefully before writing. I should have said something sooner. "I'm sorry. And congratulations on all of it." I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on my desk and went back to the Pacific file. Cassandra signed the repayment agreement and the cooperation arrangement on day 2, faster than my legal team had anticipated, which told me her attorney was competent and had given her the same unambiguous assessment that Alaric's attorney had given him. The Meridian contact, the person who had approached her through a private channel and called the exchange market research, was handled separately by Xavier's Alliance legal division. Efficiently, without noise. On day 2, Cassandra deleted every social media account she had maintained for the previous 4 years. No announcement, no farewell post, no explanation to the followers who had watched a birthday party livestream go dark mid-broadcast and received no follow-up. The accounts simply ceased to exist. The way things cease to exist when the person maintaining them has concluded that visibility is no longer an asset. I did not find this satisfying either. I found it accurate. Lyra Laura Desmond left the state on day 2. The legal proceedings followed her in the way those proceedings tend to follow people who leave without resolving them. I did not track the specifics. My attorneys did. That is what attorneys are for. Diana posted on day 5. Not the footage. I had known she would not post the footage. I had known it from the moment she turned the camera toward her own face in the garden and said what she said. What she posted instead was herself sitting in a room I did not recognize, speaking directly into a lens with the particular steadiness of someone who has decided to be honest in public and has made peace with the cost of that decision. She described without specifics a woman who had dismantled an architecture of deception using documentation and patience. She said the most powerful thing she had witnessed that evening was not anger and not retaliation, but the quality of someone who knew precisely who she was and had waited with complete composure for the room to catch up. 7 million views in 48 hours. I was told about it by Marco, who monitors certain things on my behalf and reports with the same economy of language he applies to everything else. On the morning of day 6, I was at my desk on the 17th floor. The window faced south. Not Azure Bay, a different expanse of water wider, carrying no memories of any specific evening. Indifferent to everything that had ever been said within range of its shoreline. I had chosen this office for the window 3 years ago before I chose the villa before the evaluation period began. I had wanted a view I could think clearly in front of. Marco set a coffee on the desk beside me. Pacific meeting is confirmed for 10 WAS, he said. Xavier called. The alliance contract is ready for your signature whenever you're available. I'll sign it at the meeting. He nodded. Turned to go. Marco. He stopped. I looked at him 11 years across 3 offices, 1 villa, and an evening that had required the full operational weight of everything we had built together. There was no way to put that into a sentence that would not diminish it by the attempt. Thank you, I said, for all of it, not just last week. He allowed himself a small smile, the smile of a person who has worked long enough in one place to understand that some acknowledgments are complete, precisely because they are not elaborated. That's why I'm here, Ms. Caldwell, he said. He left. I turned back to the window. 3 years. 1 evening. And a white cotton apron folded neatly on a table in a garden by the sea, left exactly where I had placed it because I had not needed to take it with me. It had served its purpose completely. That is all you can ask of any instrument. I did not know what Alaric would become after this. I did not know whether Cassandra would learn something durable from the experience, or whether the lesson would fade the way lessons fade when the immediate consequence recedes. I did not know whether Melina would ever understand what she had actually encountered, or whether she would recast the evening into a version that absolved her. Those were not my questions to answer. What I had done was show them the truth, not with anger, not with performance, not with the particular theatrical satisfaction that stories like this are sometimes expected to provide. With preparation, with patience, with documentation that did not require anyone's belief because it was already on file. I opened the Pacific Expansion folder on my screen. The project name sat at the top of the first page in the font I had selected a year ago before the evaluation period entered its final phase, when I had already understood how the evening would end and had simply been waiting for the calendar to arrive at it. I picked up my pen. There was work to do. There is a version of this story where I walked out of that garden angry, where I let the humiliation of that evening become fuel for something ugly, something that looked like family revenge but felt like losing myself in the process. I chose differently. I have come to believe, and I say this as someone who has sat with it long enough to mean it, that God does not ask us to burn down what hurts us. He asks us to stand in the truth of who we are, and let that be enough. That night at Azure Bay, the truth was enough. It did not need my anger to make it land. But I want to be honest with you. Do not do what I did. Do not spend 3 years inside a situation you already understand waiting for proof you never actually needed. I told myself I was being patient. Looking back, I was being afraid of what it would cost to leave, afraid of what the leaving would say about me. Family betrayal does not get less heavy the longer you carry it. It only gets more familiar. And family betrayal has a way of reshaping your definition of normal until you forget what normal was supposed to feel like. My personal opinion, and you may disagree, is that the most dangerous thing about family betrayal is how ordinary it begins to feel. You adjust, you accommodate, and one day you realize you have been accommodating someone else's cruelty as though it were simply the weather. It is not the weather. It is a choice they are making, and you are allowed to respond with one of your own. Family revenge is not something I set out to pursue. What I pursued was accuracy, the precise, documented, irrefutable truth. If that looked like family revenge to the people on the other side of it, I think that says more about them than about me. If any part of this story stayed with you, if it made you think or question or recognize something you have been quietly living with, I would genuinely love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to be here for the next story, you already know what to do. Thank you truly for staying until the end. The stories ahead contain fictional elements crafted with care for the purpose of reflection and education. If that is not the content you are looking for, I respect that completely. There is no shortage of other voices waiting for you. But if you are still here, I am glad you stayed.
Thanks for your time today. I will see you again in the next story.